A man has been jailed for 4.5 years after a police officer's nose was broken during a violent disorder in Southport. Shawn Beach, 55, of Lencott Walk, Manchester, was captured on CCTV during the disorder in Southport on the 30th of July. Mr. Beach was seen to grab hold of the officer's baton, which hit the officer in the face, breaking his nose. Mr. Beach then threw the baton towards a line of officers and pushed and attempted to trip over another police officer. He was sentenced on Friday to a total of 54 months in prison, 40 months for violent disorder and 14 months to run consecutively for a Section 20 assault and 3 months to run concurrently for assaulting an emergency worker. It is the longest prison sentence to date for anyone convicted for being violent in disorder in Southport. It brings the total number of arrests to 151, with 107 people charged and 82 sentenced, to a total of 172 years and 7 months in prison. Detective Inspector Paula Jones said, "This was a shocking attack on a police officer which resulted in him having suffered a broken nose. It is right that Mr. Beach should be brought to justice for his actions and receive a significant prison sentence. We will continue to put those responsible before the courts, and we would encourage anyone with any information to keep coming forward." Liam Lewis, 27, of Sandway Crescent, Norris Green, was jailed for 2 years and 8 months for violent disorder and burglary at Liverpool Crown Court on Wednesday the 20th of November. On Saturday the 3rd of August, Mr. Lewis was found to have been involved in a violent disorder that occurred in Liverpool city centre following the tragic events in Southport days earlier. He was seen to break up bricks before throwing them at police officers. Mr. Lewis was then seen letting off a fire extinguisher on the public highway before using it to force entry to a phone repair shop in Church Street. Detective Inspector Paula Jones said, "The scenes of violent criminal damage and looting we saw over the summer were disgraceful, and we are pleased to see another offender facing the consequences of their actions. To use misinformation as some sort of excuse to target members of the public, businesses and the emergency services is inexcusable, caused emotional and material damage to communities, shocked but standing together in the face of tragedy. We will continue to put those responsible before the courts." Ryan Cullen has been sentenced to a 5-year Section 45A hybrid order for the manslaughter of his grandfather in Liverpool city centre earlier this year. At around 5:40 p.m. on Saturday the 10th of February, officers were called to an address at Midgall Street to reports of a domestic assault. The victim, Brian Cullen, 73, was found with serious injuries. He sadly passed away in hospital later that month. His grandson, Ryan Cullen, 34, of no fixed abode, was arrested, charged and pleaded guilty to manslaughter at an earlier hearing. Mr. Cullen was sentenced at Liverpool Crown Court on Friday the 15th of November. The Section 45A hybrid order means that Mr. Cullen will be sent to a hospital until when he is deemed to be fit to serve the remainder of his sentence in prison. Detective Chief Inspector Andy McCourt from our Protecting Vulnerable People unit said, "This is an absolute tragic case, which has devastated the family, and although Ryan Cullen has today faced justice, we know that such an outcome cannot provide much comfort or healing." Ryan Cullen carried out a violent and unprovoked attack on his vulnerable grandfather Brian, who sustained ultimately fatal injuries, resulting in this becoming a murder investigation. Domestic abuse can take many forms, and I want to take this opportunity to highlight the help that is available to anyone who is suffering. Together with partner agencies, we will do all that we possibly can to support you, if you can find the courage to come forward. We have specially trained officers who will listen to you and support you with sensitivity and compassion. Likewise, I would ask everyone to look out for your family members, friends and neighbours that may be suffering. By contacting us, you may be helping someone who is too afraid to help themselves. Everything you tell us is taken extremely seriously and will be investigated thoroughly. James Cooney, 40, of Lunt Avenue, was sentenced at Liverpool Crown Court for Section 18 GBH of intent and 2 counts of possessing an offensive weapon. Mr. Cooney pleaded guilty to all 3 offences at an earlier hearing. At around 8 PM on Friday the 26th of July, the victim, a man in his 50s, attempted to intervene when he seen an altercation between 2 men in Oakmere Close. One of the men, later identified as James Cooney, attacked the victim with a hammer and a trowel before fleeing the scene. The victim attended hospital for treatment to a serious head injury and is continuing to recover. Speaking after sentencing, investigating Detective Constable Imi Mahmood said, "This was an appalling incident which could have so easily resulted in catastrophic injuries to a man who was attempting to defuse a volatile situation. However, the psychological impact of such an attack cannot be underestimated, and we hope that the outcome provides him with some sort of justice being served. Mr. Cooney is clearly a dangerous man capable of causing serious harm, and he will now face significant time in jail to reflect upon his disgraceful actions in July." He was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. A Liverpool man has been issued with a banning order for misusing emergency 999 and 101 telephone numbers. James Thomas, 35, from Dovecot, pleaded guilty to misusing emergency telephone systems by calling 999 and 101 multiple times when there wasn't an urgent situation to deal with. At Sefton Magistrate Court on Tuesday the 5th of November, Mr. Thomas of Gemini Drive was issued with a 2-year criminal behaviour order to not call the police on 999 or 101 numbers unless it is to report a new crime which is a genuine emergency. Paul Shelley said, "We will not tolerate the misuse of emergency services, and Mr. Thomas's behaviour was disgraceful. He made hundreds of calls, with most of the offences carried out between April and May this year. He would swear and shout down the phone at call handlers, making threats. Nobody should be subjected to such abuse while doing their job, and they are there to help people in an emergency." In addition, his persistent and abusive misuse of 999 and 101 emergency telephone systems posed a significant risk to public safety, as it diverted vital resources away from people calling in genuine emergencies. I hope this criminal behaviour sends a strong message that such public behaviour will not be tolerated, and we will take decisive action to protect our officers in the public. A breach of a criminal behaviour order is a serious offence, punishable by imprisonment or a fine. A woman from St Helens who was in charge of 2 XL bully dogs that viciously attacked a woman and caused her significant injuries has been jailed. Kellis Smith, 24, of Brookhall Close, pleaded guilty to 2 counts of being the owner or person in charge of a dog dangerously out of control and causing injury. She was sentenced to 12 months in prison at Liverpool Crown Court. At around 11 PM on Monday the 15th of May 2023, 2 XL bully dogs escaped from an insecure garden and ran onto the street before attacking a woman aged in her 20s. Neighbours who heard the victim's screams came rushing out to help the woman, and emergency services were called to the scene. The attack, which lasted for around 7 minutes, resulted in the woman sustaining life-changing injuries to her arms and hands, as well as a prison sentence. The judge also banned Miss Smith from owning dogs for 2 years and issued a destruction order for the 2 dogs, which since the incident have been kept in secure police kennel. Detective Sergeant Ian Harrison said, "Miss Smith failed in her responsibility to keep these dogs in a secure premises, which led them to running out onto the street and attacking a young woman. Miss Smith's recklessness resulted in this horrific incident, which lasted around 7 minutes and left the victim with life-changing injuries to her arms and hands. It was only thanks to the brave actions of neighbours it wasn't worse. We can only hope that this case gives a stark warning to dog owners about keeping animals under control. We will act on all information provided on suspected irresponsible dog ownership. Failing to keep your dog under control can lead to the worst imaginable." A Liverpool man who ran a social media account to sell drugs to children has been jailed for 3 years. Shan Carrington, 35, of Mead Road, Liverpool, was sentenced at Liverpool Crown Court for being concerned in the supply of cannabis and possession of intent to supply cannabis. It is from Merseyside's Project Medusa, the initiative to tackle county lines drug dealing and child criminal exploitation across the country, began an investigation into Mr. Carrington in July 2024. The investigation began when a child was hospitalised after using a cannabis vape. A Merseyside Safer Schools officer identified that the vape was purchased from an online drug dealing account targeting children and shared this information with Project Medusa team. The child made a full recovery. Detectives identified Mr. Carrington as the controller of a Snapchat account called the Liverpool Connoisseur and executed a warrant at his address on Mead Road in August 2024, where he was arrested and later charged being concerned in the supply of Class B drugs and possession with intent to supply Class B drugs, namely cannabis. Officers also seized cannabis vapes and cannabis marketed in bright packaging and including cartoons at his address. Police staff investigator Jack Rothwell from the Project Medusa team said Mr. Carrington ran a drug dealing operation and used Snapchat to advertise illegal drugs to young children. We are working proactively to take drugs off our street, including online spaces where drugs are being sold. In this case, the diligent work of our Safer Schools officer allowed us to identify where the vape was being purchased and take quick action to bring Mr. Carrington to justice. Illicit vapes are very dangerous, and it's important we all get the message out to the public that they can cause serious harm to our young people. Our Safer Schools officers deliver regular inputs to schools about these dangers. We would also urge parents, guardians and anyone with information about those supplying illegal drugs to get in touch so we can fully investigate. A man has been jailed for 8 years after officers carried out a warrant at his home in Stockbridge Village and discovered a firearm and Class A drugs. Anthony Cosgrove, 27 of Cheadle Avenue in Old Swan, appeared at Liverpool Crown Court Thursday the 24th of October after pleading guilty to possession of a firearm, possession with intent to supply controlled Class A drugs, heroin and crack cocaine, and acquiring, using and possessing criminal property. On Friday the 3rd of May 2024, officers carried out a warrant at an address in Steerscroft, leading to the recovery of a revolver, crack cocaine, heroin and cash. The firearm was found in an outbuilding in the front yard, and following examinations, it was found to be a viable weapon. Mr. Cosgrove was linked to the revolver through a DNA match, and he was subsequently arrested. Detective Chief Inspector Phil Atkinson from the Firearms Investigation Team said, "We are committed to removing guns from our streets and putting the people who carry them before the courts." The warrant carried out on Steerscroft was just one example of how we proactively investigate serious organised crime and the use of firearms in our communities. We were able to link Mr. Cosgrove to the firearm through a DNA match, and he will now spend a lengthy time in prison for his actions. Information from the public is vital if we are to break down the organised crime groups who bring misery to our streets. So come forward if you have any concerns about serious organised crime where you live, work or visit. A man has been jailed following an incident in Bootle Saturday the 2nd of November. At around 9:40 p.m, police responded to a report that a man had made threats and was in possession of a weapon inside a property on Bedford Road. Armed officers attended and a man was arrested. A search of the property was carried out and no weapons were found. No injuries were reported. On Sunday the 3rd of November, 28-year-old Drew Matthews was charged with sending malicious communication. On Monday the 4th of November, Mr. Matthews of Strand Road, Bootle, pleaded guilty at Wirral Magistrate Court and was sentenced to 10 weeks in prison, along with paying court fines and costs. Detective Inspector Paul McVie said, "We are thankful that no weapons were found at the property. However, this was a flagrant waste of public resources where officers attended the incident, which could have been needed in an emergency situation elsewhere. We hope this sentencing sends a clear message that this behaviour of making such calls will not be tolerated, and we will do everything we can to investigate an offender and pursue action through the courts." A woman who crashed into a cyclist in St Helens and left him to die has been jailed for 6 years and 8 months. Anya Foster, 32 of Gloucester Street, St Helens, pleaded guilty to causing death by careless driving while over the prescribed limit for 2 separate controlled substances, driving whilst unfit through drugs, failing to stop after a collision, and failing to report a collision. She was sentenced at Liverpool Crown Court. Miss Foster was driving a Skoda Fabia on Friday the 1st of December 2023 when she struck David Burrows, aged 59 from St Helens, who was riding a pedal bike on Island's Brow junction with Hinckley Road. David was taken to hospital for treatment but sadly died of his injuries shortly afterwards. Instead of staying at the scene to help David, Miss Foster drove off. Following inquiries, she was arrested later that same day, having driven home, and was subsequently charged with the offences. Detective Sergeant Simon Duffy from the Matrix Serious Collision Investigation Unit said, Miss Foster's reckless and selfless driving resulted in the death of an innocent man whilst he was riding to work, completely devastating his family. Not only did Miss Foster cause the crash, but rather than stop at the scene to help David and face the consequences of her actions, she chose to flee and began to weave a web of lies. Our investigation proved that Miss Foster attempted to mislead officers at multiple stages. We have worked tirelessly to establish the full fact, and Miss Foster has now been held accountable for her actions. Our thoughts remain firmly with David's family and friends as they continue to deal with the devastating outcome of this heartbreaking incident every day. The sentencing comes as Merseyside Police prepares for its annual drink and drug driving campaign, OP Limit. The operation will see dedicated patrols focusing on removing selfish drivers from our roads who choose to drink alcohol and take drugs before getting behind the wheel. My message to those who choose to drive whilst under the influence is this: you are not only putting your own life at risk and your own future at risk, but also the lives of innocent people. Is it really worth risking your own life and the life of others? A man who pulled the trigger of a gun that killed Peter Hale was jailed for 7 years and 1 month. At around 4:40 PM on Monday the 29th of January, it was reported that a man entered a flat on Haslingden Close and shot Peter, who was 50, who subsequently died in hospital. Shay Walker, 26 of Broad Green Road, was cleared of Peter Hale's murder at a trial after stating he was not aware the firearm was loaded, but he had earlier pleaded guilty to possession of a prohibited weapon and possession of ammunition without certificate in relation to the gun. He appeared at Liverpool Crown Court on Monday, where he was sentenced to 7 years and 1 month in prison. Following the sentencing, Detective Chief Inspector Jason Pye said, Shay Walker admitted to being someone who was prepared to carry out and store an extremely dangerous firearm. Merseyside is undoubtedly a safer place with him in prison, and we are pleased that he cannot cause any further harm. We have a dedicated firearms investigation team who proactively investigate the use of guns in Merseyside, solving crimes as well as uncovering where guns are being stored, who is carrying them, and ultimately who is prepared to fire them. We carry out regular stop and searches, warrants, and open land searches to locate weapons and ensure anyone involved in gun crime is brought to justice. It is vital that members of our communities come forward with information so that we can make our communities safer for the decent, law-abiding people who live in the affected areas. A woman has been issued with a banning order for multiple shoplifting and antisocial behaviour offences in Liverpool. Darcy Collins, 24, of Muirhead Avenue in Toobrook, was issued with a 2-year banning order in Sefton Magistrates Court. Miss Collins admitted numerous thefts at stores including Tesco's on St Oswald Street, Asda on Green Lane, Co-op and Morrison's on West Derby Road, where she stole large quantities of items such as shampoo, air freshener, cheese, butter and chocolate. One theft of meat steak from M&S Food Hall on Queen's Drive was valued at £250. In another instance, Miss Collins stole items of the value of £167 from Tesco's. Under a criminal behaviour order, Miss Collins is now banned from entering numerous shops, including Tesco stores on Queen's Road and St Oswald Street, Asda on Green Lane, and Co-op stores on West Derby Road and Darley Drive. Neighbourhood Inspector Kieran Hogan said Colin would steal stock and walk out of the shop without paying for the goods. She would in addition also be abusive to store staff and cause antisocial behaviour, Theft from shops is not a victimless crime and has a huge impact on not only the business but the community as well in many ways, especially small shops trying to make an honest living. We hope this serves as a clear warning to others that the force will robustly take steps to address prolific offenders working with businesses and partners. Three men were jailed for a total of 44 years in prison following an injury shooting in Netherton earlier this year. The three men were sentenced at Liverpool Crown Court. At around 1 p.m. on Friday the 5th of January, after receipt of a shooting at Harrops Croft, a 26-year-old man was later identified as having sustained a gunshot injury to his leg. Following an extensive investigation, three men were arrested, charged, and found guilty in August before sentencing. Joel Hastings, 30, of Andrew Street, Walton, was sentenced to 16 years in prison for possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. Jake Howells, 24, of Langham Street, and his twin brother, Daniel Howells, 24, of Field Lane, Liverland, were each sentenced to 14 years in prison for conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. All three will serve an extended 4 years on licence. All three had been found guilty at Liverpool Crown Court in August. Detective Chief Inspector Phil Atkinson, who heads up the firearm investigation team, said the sentences handed out reflect the recklessness and planning of this attack, which earlier this year left a man injured and a community understandably shaken. The consequences of gun crime can be far-reaching and devastating, and we will do all in our powers to identify and bring before the courts those who look to bring such weapons onto our streets. Although a number of firearm incidents in Merseyside continues to decrease, we will never cease our determination to target and apprehend gun crime offenders. Despite the victims' reluctance to cooperate with our investigation, we were able to prove the involvement of Mr. Hastings and the Howells brothers, and they are today starting significant terms of imprisonment, thanks to the hard work of the investigation team and the support of the CPS and the courts. Three dangerous people have been removed from those communities put at risk. A man from Crosby has been sentenced to 17 years and 9 months in prison after he used EncroChat to peddle large quantities of Class A drugs. Paul Agnew, 37, of Moore Drive in Cosby, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, cocaine, heroin and MDMA, and was jailed at Liverpool Crown Court. Using the EncroChat handle Destructive Taylor, Mr. Agnew aspired to supply over 46 kilos of cocaine, 23 kilos of heroin and 18 kilos of MDMA. Carried out a lengthy and complex investigation which involved the analysis of messages and images sent by the handler's user between March and June 2020. They were able to prove that Mr. Agnew was behind the device after he sent another EncroChat user an image of a parking ticket he was given, which included his name and address. He would also regularly reference his close family members and mention businesses that were linked back to him. On top of this, Mr. Agnew would also refer to himself as Ag, Aggie or Ags. Mr. Agnew was arrested and charged in July 2021, but the court proceedings were delayed due to legal challenges with regard to certain pieces of evidence. These challenges proved to be futile and Mr. Agnew eventually pleaded guilty to the offences. The investigation forms a further part of Merseyside Police's ongoing response to Operation Venetic, an international operation targeting criminals who use mobile encryption service, commonly referred to as EncroChat, in an attempt to evade detection. Constable Kevin Mitchell said, Mr. Agnew clearly thought he could hide behind the encrypted phone in order to supply large quantities of drugs. Sadly for him, this wasn't the case, and our officers were able to piece together the evidence to show he was behind the Destructive Taylor handle. The process of gathering evidence in cases like this is incredibly thorough. We were able to prove without a doubt that Mr. Agnew was behind this drugs conspiracy, and this was only possible due to the strength of the evidence. We know the devastation that drugs cause, and Merseyside Police remains relentless in our pursuit of these criminals and ending their drug trade. I hope this result shows that our officers are committed in our pursuit of those people who think they are above the law and believe they can evade justice. We will continue to target criminals like Mr. Agnew by thoroughly examining any evidence and carrying out any necessary searches across Merseyside.